G'day everybody, it's Dan here at Pilates with Dan with your next tutorial YouTube clip. Today we're going to have a look at another movement that we quite often do in classes here in the studio. And it's a move much like the 100 that we did in the previous tutorial, which you can find, there's probably a link up there. So check it out. Much like that, we do it quite often earlier on in the session, and it's the exercise which we call the supine spine twist. Now, the supine spine twist is an exercise that's not, as far as I'm aware, in the classical repertoire. So it's not a movement necessarily that would be broken down in a normal classical session. But from our contemporary training, it's something that I find is quite nice to introduce early on in the session, because what we're trying to do in a Pilates lesson is move your body in lots of different ways. Okay, so and if we think about, if I think about all my students here at Pilates with Dan, many of them are office workers and sit all day. So one fact of sitting all day is you tend to be kind of very much in this plane of motion. So introducing rotational movement is something that we like to do here. And if we look at some of the classical repertoire that we're always trying to achieve, there are some really big rotational, lovely rotational movements. If I think about the mat work, early on is the spine twist, which is a seated exercise. So you can think of this movement as kind of like a warm-up or a precursor to that movement. Okay. So what I want to break down in the tutorial here is kind of why we do it and what are the options for us. Okay, because there's a lot of different ways to do the same movement. Okay. All right. So I'll show you what we do as a standard, and then we can have a little chat about it. Now I'm going to use this angle a little bit, so I'm going to be lying down. It's going to be a bit weird. So we're laying down this way. Okay. So the idea here is, after we've done some just basic warm-ups, I'll put this movement in just to start to rotate your spine a little bit. Okay, so the idea is that the hands are a little bit wider than your mat. Okay, and the standard way to do this movement is we're going to bring the legs up in the air, and I like to flex the feet there, but that's just purely choreography. You can have the feet relaxed. Okay, so I like to flex the feet, and it's a tip over and draw back in. Notice I don't go too far. Okay, what I'm actually trying to do right now is keep my rib cage on the floor as I go side to side. Okay, now it might not mean too much movement for you, and that's okay. You just build that up and try and go a little bit further each time. If you go so far that the shoulders and ribs lift up, okay, that's probably too far to go in a warm-up setting. Okay, so, and as I said, many of my clients are office workers who sit a lot, and this is his seated position, I understand that, but here we're just having that rotation of the pelvis and lower back. Okay, so that's the basic movement that we do in classes here. Now, if that movement, having both legs up in the air, is not quite for you at the moment, maybe you've got an injury you're recovering from, some surgery, postnatally, all these sort of things, right? So the option that we present is taking that load off. And what I mean by that is that the legs are a load that the body has to move with the supine spine twist. So the option would be, it's the back of my head again, the option would be having the feet down on the ground. You're still rotating the pelvis and spine, so you're introducing that movement for you, but then you're taking the load, that is the legs, away from the equation. Okay, so still tipping side to side and drawing it back in. Now that option is definitely an easier option, and it's something that literally anybody can do, okay? Bearing in mind that our ultimate goal is to have the legs up in the air for this movement, okay? So one thing I'd want you to do is, as you're practicing the spine twist with the feet on the ground, I'd want you to think about what's happening through the belly and see if you can get a sense of activating or engaging these muscles as you draw back in, okay? It will help you in the long run when we ask for the legs to be in the air. Now, other versions of that, so we can graduate that and we can have one leg come up, extend it out and back in, so that you're getting used to introducing load, okay? We can also incorporate that same move here, extend, back in, extend, back in, again to incorporate load, because as we progress this movement, we then ask you to have the legs straight up in the air. Okay, so this is a version of the movement which is called pendulum or tick-tock. I've heard it called tick-tock before. It's with a straighter leg, it's a lot harder. Okay, and that's okay if it's allowed to be a little bit harder, but we can incorporate that as you strengthen up. So just rewind a little bit. We're thinking about incorporating a rotational movement for our lower body, introducing that movement because maybe we've been stuck in a seated position all day, and gradually increasing the loading as we go. We can add multiple breaths to the movement. We can add little kicks. These are all little choreographic movements, but we're using it as an introduction for rotation with a mind for what's going to happen later in the class. So the spine twist, the seated spine twist, which is very much a classical movement, involves the upper body going through rotation as well. And then we have things like the saw, where you have rotation and flexion. You can think of the spine twist, this supine spine twist, as a really nice way to warm up, ready for all those movements. As you progress through the levels, it gets a little bit harder and harder and harder, and you end up doing things like a hip twist and all that sort of stuff. So, but all those rotational movements can be brought all the way back to that movement with the feet on the floor. Okay, so that's the supine spine twist. If you have any questions, let me know. Make sure you hit subscribe and like and all that jazz. Comment below what you'd like to see next. We've got a few plans for the tutorials this year, and I'll see you in the studio soon.